All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 6 of the Safe Routes to School Academy. Today, we are going to talk all things engineering, and we try to approach this conversation of there's engineers that are really great to have on your team, and they know the nitty-gritty of the angles and the things. And then there's all of us that, unless you're an engineer, um, that's more of the programming side of how can engineering still help our program. So today, hopefully it's a new approach to talking about engineering through public health, through planning and such like that, to see how we can still continue to advance our Safe Routes to School program. Um, Kelly is driving the slides today, so if you want to go to the next one. Just a reminder of the topics we've covered so far and what we will cover going forward. Um, we have 2 more weeks after this, which is kind of crazy. Next slide. So warm welcome and introductions. Again, if you can put your name in the chat where you're working, and when you think of engineering, what do you think of when pertaining to Safe Routes to School? So put that in the chat, we'll respond, give you some emojis, things like that. We'll have a local highlight story and then the call to action for the week. All right, so last week's call to action hopefully was a little bit of a lighter touch. We encouraged you to mark your calendars for several of the upcoming Safe Routes to School event days, and other type of activities for you to be involved. And then the second one was to identify a school or community that you'd like to help with one of those upcoming event days and reach out to them. The bonus for this week was to submit a crossing guard story. Did anyone reach out to a community or school and get a response back that you were surprised with? Or do you have a community that you would like to reach out to once the spring kind of gets warmer and people start thinking about walking and biking more? Does one person want to come off mute? Nobody? All right, well, if you think of one, you can put it in the chat too. But we'll keep going just because we have so much great topics today. All right, Kelly, I'll pass it to you.
All right, good morning, folks. We do have a big presentation, but I will do my best to try and keep us moving, and Sophie will bump me along if I'm going. I love this topic, and I'm going to do my best to try and just touch on the high level so it's not too much information. But the 2 big things that I do want you to take away from today is that you're not an engineer and you don't need to be, and that's okay. You're an expert in what feels comfortable for you, what feels safe for you, and what feels convenient for you. So if you are out walking or biking around and it doesn't feel safe and it doesn't feel convenient, it probably doesn't feel safe, convenient, and comfortable for other folks. And that's the kind of information that we bring to our transportation partners to talk about. And maybe it does feel safe and comfortable and convenient for you, but thinking about other members in your community, would you let someone who's 8-year-old walk or cross that street by themselves? What about an 80-year-old who's using a mobility aid like a walker or a cane? Would you feel comfortable letting them cross there? Do they have enough time to cross that intersection? So thinking about in that terms and not getting into the turn radius and all those things, it's just safe, comfortable, and convenient is what we're looking for. And that's why we have Safe Routes teams, is to lean on the expertise of our partners. And our role is just to try and bring people together and have these conversations. Safe systems approach is maybe something you've heard about, and this is kind of the transportation model for getting us towards 0 fatalities. So it includes reducing speeds, having safely engineered roadways. There's some work on safer vehicles that have the technology to slow down and things like that, educating roadway users to be safer, and then our EMS partners being able to handle crashes when they do happen. So the goals for engineering E in Safe Routes, the biggest one is creating a line of conversation or annual, biannual meetings between school partners and our city or county engineers and transportation partners. Oftentimes schools, they're under-resourced, staff is turned over, it's hard for them to make time and sustain those relationships. So having someone kind of nudge and say, like, I know you're busy, let's get together for an hour. We want to know where the pain points are in our transportation system for students and the school. And the city can talk about what is in their queue for projects for grant funding or what's coming up down the pipeline that maybe there can be some adjustments to better accommodate students. So the goal here really is to build that communication channel. And then once you have that, try and work on some prioritized lists. If the school is like, this intersection's bad, we need a sidewalk here, and we need a mid-block crossing here, then those are the prioritized projects that you're going to put in there. And hopefully the city kind of embeds them into their list moving forward. So making those relationships, creating a prioritized list, and then helping when possible around grant writing for infrastructure. It might be getting letters of support. It might be creating or writing, drafting the equity statement, whatever it might be. So those are the big things. We're not expecting you to go out there and paint. We're not expecting you to go out there and fill a pothole or anything like that. It's more about facilitating conversations and doing some planning. One thing we don't talk about often is youth transportation and how it's a little different. So maybe if we're comfortable or we know a lot about the TZD towards zero death rule or program, or maybe we've done a safety action plan in a community, we oftentimes look at serious or fatal crashes, and serious crashes are when like an ambulance would come. But youth transportation is historically underrepresented in our data for crash collection. Maybe there is a near miss. Those don't get called in and reported to law enforcement. Maybe there was a small crash, but someone was able to walk away, or they were able to walk away and their bike was mangled. Youth often feel like they are in the wrong. Adults know the transportation system. Adults have those driver's license. So if they were crossing the street and hit by a driver and are able to walk away, they're embarrassed. So they get up and go so no one sees them. They don't know to call law enforcement, or they don't want to. And they're concerned for some of those equity principles that we've talked about before. So while crash data is really helpful, youth engagement that we've talked about before is very important, because that's where we hear about those near misses or those small crashes that have occurred that haven't been reported. Oh, the last thing I'll say is the destinations are different. They're not going to work. They're going to school, parks, rec center, sports activities, after school jobs, the theater, whatever it might be. And those are different locations than where adults go. So if you do a map of destinations for adults and destinations for youth, it's probably going to look different. And then you do crashes for youth and adults, and you're going to have very different maps. And if you were not separating them, you would probably have some different conclusions with your work. So just thinking, we're talking about different modes besides just cars. So, people walking are a bit slower. People biking are a bit faster. If they're on e-bikes, they're even faster than that. People walking are typically on sidewalks or trails. Bikes can be on sidewalks or trails, or they can be on the roadway wherever they feel more comfortable. And kids specifically have narrower field of vision, so they're not seen as far away. They have lower sight lines because they're shorter, so the signs are pretty tall for them, and they have a different understanding of real or perceived dangers. And this is where our education can really help, but we also want to engineer a system that feels safer for them. So you can drop it in the chat box, or you can come off mute. How does this feel to you? When you see this picture, does it feel fine? Does it feel like something you've seen before? Does it kind of give you the internal cringe? And why? And I'm going to embrace the awkward pause until someone comes off mute and drops some things in the chat. All right. I'll start going, but if you have other things, just drop them in the chat. Yeah, it makes you nervous. It looks dark. Cars are super close. Yeah. So infrastructure wise, this is good, right? We have a curb cut. We have the truncated domes. It looks like there's a crosswalk. We have street lighting right over the intersection. But you can see when that parent arrival line is getting queued up, People are going to line up, and then we're going to create this space where it is really uncomfortable and kids have to be walking in between cars. This was from a normal observation day that I attended, and it just shows that you can have really good infrastructure, but we also have to kind of train drivers and people on how to use it and be safe. Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Yeah, cars and people sharing the same space with no barriers other than a little flag and stop sign. It is kind of daunting. All right, so what do we mean? What does comfortable feel like for you when you are walking or biking? What makes it feel comfortable or safe or convenient? Or jump in the chat box. Is it the presence of other people? Is it lighting? Is it wayfinding signage? Is it a place to walk or a place to bike? Right, I'm seeing separated facilities. Yeah, everyone has their own lane. So, people walking are separated from people biking are separated from cars so that we're not crashing into each other. Yeah, more space away from moving vehicles. When we each have our own space to be, it's more predictable. Yeah, lighting and nice pathways are things we like, clear signage. Exactly. And convenience is another one. We don't always want to walk a block or 2 blocks down to get to the crosswalk signal. Human nature is the shortest route to a destination, and especially for kids, we want to think about how can we meet kids where they are to cross where they're naturally going to cross and be safe. Good. So here's another example of some small changes in how much of a difference it can make. So you can see that the crosswalk didn't change much in front of there, but we expanded space on the sidewalk so that there is a nice place to walk. There's a place where you could sit or wait for the car, take a phone call. You have some trees that will grow up and give you some shade while you're walking. And now there's plenty of space to navigate through without the tree in the way. There's more space for patio seating. So it just gives more space for people to be there, whether it's sitting outside that cafe or walking or biking. Oh, Luke, I'm glad we got your hometown there. So here is another example from a walk audit in a school in rural Minnesota. I think we can see what we are missing here. So if I'm taking the picture, I'm facing away from the school. Couple things you'll see here. There's no sidewalks on the houses around this school. Right here, you're going to see at the bottom a desire path. And this is where snow is helpful because we can see where kids are walking and where there's not either plowing happening or a place for them to safely walk or bike. So sometimes snow can be our friend. Hopefully not again anytime soon, but to help show us where those desire paths are. Some people call them goat trails. Otherwise, you can see those footprints in the mud or what might you be. Those are going to be helpful when we have these conversations. Here's another one in more of an urban area. So again, you can see that there's a crosswalk with a curb cut and truncated domes, and we have the signal crossing and great sidewalks, but we forgot to maintain them and shovel them, and that can make it harder. These kids can navigate over it, but if you're pushing a stroller or a walker or in a wheelchair, another mobility device, it's going to be tricky to get through that snow. And again, if I'm pushing my kids in their stroller, it's kind of awkward to navigate around that fire hydrant to get to the curb cut and cross the street without lifting over the curb. And if you've ever pushed a stroller or a wagon and you're trying to lift it over a curb, it doesn't go well. So thinking about how do we make that space clear, because we have sidewalks and a curb cut, that could be nice. Another example of having crossing guards and having crosswalks and lighted pedestrian intervals. But again, we need to maintain the sidewalks, but not forget about those curbs where oftentimes snow gets put from the snow plows when they're clearing off the roadways. So thinking about those as well. Again, pretty common example in greater Minnesota where around the school zone we might not have sidewalks, but it might be a lower traffic street. Can we do a painted pedestrian lane here, or could we get a sidewalk here so that it is safer for all students to be able to walk? Another great example of cutting through a neighborhood to a beautiful school and needing a desire path or something to help make that connection so students aren't going through someone's yard or they're not crossing there. Here is another example. It's kind of a fuzzy picture from a few years ago, but it was our walk to school day winner. When it was raining out, you can see that they were along a state highway, and there wasn't a place for them to walk. After the planning grant, they did get infrastructure for a trail facility there, and so those kids are no longer walking along there. Again, another super fun photo, but you can see the kids are stepping up because there's not a curb cut there. So it works great for those kids, but other kids who might have some mobility aids or a stroller, it might be a little trickier to get up that curb cut. And another example of our winter time, and you can see where the curb kind of ends here, but we have all this area of snow that there's not too many people driving in. So what this could represent is that if we put a curb extension here, it doesn't seem like it would impact traffic too much because we can see that the intersection goes out this way. So using snow to show us where there's underutilized roadway that we could reallocate for other transportation users. Another first conversation when we're talking about safe routes to school and new communities that we hear often is, we want a tunnel to get under this busy road, or we want an overpass to get over this road. And it does make sense. It's totally separated traffic flow, but it's not without barriers. So if this was just for adults to use or trail users to use or family to use, it can work a little bit better. But these two are examples from around a school that have had many challenges. So the tunnel helps access a newly built middle school, and it was built when the school was being built. However, you have a tunnel there, and even with great lighting, they've closed it down during school hours because there was bullying happening in the tunnel, or events happening right as someone would walk out of the tunnel. So instead of having a staff member down there, they did have to close it because they didn't have any staff. You know, this one was built, but some others can be built where you also have to worry about the snow melting and then freezing on the tunnel, and then you have ice there and other things. They're also incredibly expensive compared to some other examples we have. Here we have on the bottom left a pedestrian overpass. I think ballpark starting price is going to be about $3 million. We don't have any grants at a state or federal level that are going to get you $3 million for a project. So if that is something your community wants, there's a pretty sizable amount that would be on the community to lift up and put forward in a grant to supplement on a smaller piece. And then over here, you know, we have additional like bullying factors. People can put signs or put cups through that fencing there that could be bullying or other messages. There have been kids who have, you know, made tragic decisions off of those bridges right out the school. So other things to think about instead of just the infrastructure. But the big cost, how youth will use them, are other considerations to have in our communities. So the other thing we've talked about with engineering is, besides just separating the different modes, is really trying to slow people down. Because the slower people are, if the worst happens, the more likely someone is going to be able not only to survive, but to live their normal life. So again, if we're going at 20 miles per hour in a school speed zone, there is only a 13% chance of a serious or fatal crash. Whereas if someone is going over the speed limit, or they don't have a school speed zone and going 40, you can see that jumps up to 73% chance of a crash that leads to a fatal or serious injury. And it also takes significantly longer to stop. So this is why a big part of our emphasis is on slowing down cars going around schools as much as we can. Things that also help slow down cars, narrowing lanes. If you've ever been in like an urban area in a neighborhood and they have parking on both sides of the street and you're trying to go down it, it's really tight, and another car comes up and you're like, I don't know if we're going to have enough room to pass. What you've done there is you've slowed down because the infrastructure feels tight. So going from a 14, 15-foot travel lane to an 11-foot travel lane is going to make a difference. It cues the driver that something else is different here and we need to slow down. That's similar with curb extensions. Even adding boulevard trees feels like that roadway gets a little tighter. It also gives some shade to people walking. Bike lanes can do the same. If you have a really wide road, adding some bike lanes is going to narrow in those traffic lanes for our drivers. So school speed zones or reducing the citywide speed limit are other policy approaches that we could consider. So I'm going to quickly go over some other examples of infrastructure. You don't need to remember all the things, but just so you're familiar with these concepts. And what I've done is I've taken components out of the fact sheets that the Federal Highway Administration has around pedestrian safe system steps, countermeasures. So first and easiest would be crosswalk. There's different types of crosswalks. You can have a high-vis crosswalk, which is more reflective pieces that are in the paint. You can have more of this kind of bar style, or you can just have the two lines as a crosswalk. But the more things you do to enhance that visibility, it can reduce crashes between 20 and 40%. And you can see on the left, it is one of the lower cost strategies of less than $3,000. There's also a raised crosswalk, which is another option. It's kind of like a really big speed table that has a crosswalk on it. And so it physically requires the cars to slow down to go over that crosswalk. It also elevates the crosswalk so drivers are able to see it from further away so that they can start to stop or slow down, putting those little kids at a higher level. So again, they're easier for drivers to see. Another really interesting and useful approach that schools could take, especially on lower traffic or low speed roadways. Again, you have costs down there. A leading pedestrian interval is simply changing the timing for these pedestrian crossings so that pedestrians get a little bit more time before the green light goes to get out in the intersection and show that they're walking and try and get crossed before additional traffic may be going. And again, you can see from the cost, incredibly low cost option. Adding in what we call pedestrian refuge islands. And so this is so people crossing only have to look at one lane of traffic. So they're looking to their left for the cars coming down, they're stopping in the middle, and now they're looking right for the next row of cars. So when there is a busier street, or when you have kids who have a tough time finding the gaps between cars going in different directions, giving them that refuge island where they can wait and look for just one lane of traffic works a lot better. Here we have it where it's put in with concrete or cement. We have seen approaches where it has been bollards or those big poles and paint to do a temporary pedestrian refuge island, and those work, great as well. You can see a 32% reduction in crashes. You've maybe heard of a road diet before. We like to reframe them a bit as a roadway reallocation because no one likes a diet or roadway buffet because we're making improvements for all modes. So where we would traditionally have a 4-lane road, 2 lanes going in each way. What often happens is, say there's this car, they stop because they see someone in the crosswalk. Someone's driving very fast behind them, doesn't understand why that car's crossed, so they get in the right lane to try and go around the car, and they don't see that there's a pedestrian there, and they don't have enough time to stop. And that's where we call the double threat. And this happens a lot. So these 2-way roads in each direction are very dangerous for people walking. So we like to reconsider that. Can we take the space for those 4 lanes and make it 1 lane in each direction with a middle turn lane? We have some space on the edge, so we can move the fog lines in to make a bike lane or at least tighten up the roadway. And then this gives it a little bit easier for people to cross. Again, they're just looking at 1 lane of traffic instead of 4 lanes before they are trying to cross. And this has a very big crash reduction. And again, if you're kind of more on the left-hand side and you're just changing where paint lines are, it is a lower cost option. Rectangular rapid flashing beacons. These are a little bit more expensive. I think this says 4,500. I think we're closer to 10,000 now. And so this is just, again, flashing lights to help remind drivers something different is here. Slow down, people are walking. Especially when we have littles, the flashing lights can help bring about that awareness. So a 47% reduction in crashes. Maybe you've seen this pedestrian hybrid beacon. It's more of maybe a hawk signal. Yeah. Oop. That's up there. And so it's not a traditional traffic light. It is just stopping for when pedestrians are there. You've maybe seen these in some, there's only a few around the state. They are very expensive. We're typically looking over $100,000 for those. So it might be outside of a budget, but it is something to consider if it is the last tool in the toolbox to try. All right, we've mentioned a little bit about curb extensions. So these can be actually the concrete going all the way out. We've seen them before, which is bollards and paint. But what this does is it shortens that crossing distance or the exposure to cars. So when we have little feet, when we have people using mobility aids, it is going to make it a shorter distance to cross and less opportunity for a car to strike them. What it also does is when someone is kind of standing here where the number 4 is, as cars are coming up, it's a lot easier to see someone where the number 4 is than if they are back over on that maybe 10 feet back. They're hidden by that parked car. So queuing them out closer to the crosswalk means drivers are more likely to see them. And it helps slow vehicles as well. So here is a low-cost example that we did in a rural community of about 3,500 in southeastern Minnesota. So you can see we used paint, we used bollards, which we just have these butyl pads that they stuck to the ground so they can be removed. The white stripe here is actually like a sticky strip of roadway tape that has reflection in it to help show that. And then we had the state law crosswalk signs and painted a crosswalk here. So something that was done for, I think, under $10,000, under $5,000 to make a safer crossing so students could get to the right, which is where the elementary school was. Thinking about rural areas, sometimes paved shoulders can be helpful. If it's a very busy highway, you might not want to put people on that roadway, but if it is a county road with, a few cars coming here and there, that paved shoulder area might be a better place for recreational rides to happen. Separated bike lanes, again, like we were saying, what feels comfortable in the beginning, separation. So separated bike lanes can look a little different. You can have cars parked, and that is a separation from driving. You can have concrete or planters to separate the bicyclists from the cars driving. There's some different ways there, but you can see there is 90% reduction in fatalities when we have separated bike lanes for bicyclists, and even a 40% reduction for drivers or all road users. So other examples of bike lanes, on the top left, you can see we have a little concrete median that's providing some separation, a physical separation and a visual separation. The bottom left, again, we have the parking lane. Then we have some bollards and paint, and then we have the bike lane here, so there's even more physical separation. The big photo with the kids who are biking on Bike to School Day, this is just a painted separated lane using 2 white stripes. Sometimes bollards or cones or planters are put there, but again, a lower cost option for this street, which was likely a 4-lane roadway before this. Other areas where maybe a 4-way stop would be good, or people aren't complying with a 4-way stop, or traffic circles can happen in small neighborhood areas. So again, that kind of slows traffic going this way. There's a huge reduction with roundabouts on the fatal crashes, right? Because you're not having a car versus car head-on crash, you're probably having more of a fender bender. So we're calling a tow truck and not an ambulance when crashes happen in our roundabouts. And that's why we are seeing them more places, because they're one of the best tools we have to reduce the serious and fatal crashes for drivers. as we think about slowing cars in neighborhoods or coming up to schools, this is where roundabouts and traffic circles are great because there is a physical barrier that someone can't be cruising down that roadway at 45, 50 miles per hour. If it is a roundabout, not a traffic circle like this, they literally have to slow down to 20 miles per hour to be able to navigate through the roundabout. And similar traffic circles are going to slow people down to get around them. So another great useful tool in our toolbox. If you are wondering, I don't even know what could go on my roadway. If you have a good idea of how big your roadway is, maybe it's like 30 feet. Street Mix is an online tool that you can go in and you can plop a parking lane. You can plop an 8-foot bike lane. You can add other amenities here so you can kind of see what is possible within the roadway width that you have. Not that you are an engineer and you're going to bring this forward as a final design, but it can help you understand that there's so many different uses for that land that our transportation sector owns and how we could repurpose it so it better fits the needs of all users for those walking, biking, and using cars or transit. If you are in a small or rural community, this is getting a little bit older, but I love going to it and taking a peek. It has great data, it has great visuals of different approaches. So things like I said of adding in shoulders on rural roadways, adding in pedestrian lanes on really low traffic small town streets, just so people know where they should be going if there's not sidewalks and there's not a palette for sidewalks in that community because there's a lot of seniors. It's an aging community. They won't be able to shovel and now they're getting kicked out of their house and blah, blah, blah. So pedestrian lanes have been something we've seen in our greater Minnesota communities. All right. So a couple examples of other approaches for engineering is school speed zones. So this is working with your engineer to have a speed that is lower by the school zone. So maybe it's 30, maybe it's 40, and trying to bring it down to 20, 25 around that school zone. Again, slowing cars, if the worst happens, there's a better chance for full survival and full a better recovery if the worst happens. The other thing I'm kind of thinking about is as more of this technology is happening with newer cars that, you know, they can kind of adjust speeds as they go. Maybe it has warning signals that flash on your dashboard if you're going above the speed. The more we have these school speed zones, the more likely that new technology is going to help enforce that, especially as we are looking on the horizon for the potential of automated enforcement cameras or speed cameras that are being piloted in work zones and school zones right now. And school speed zones, again, are just another way to remind drivers that there's lots of littles around and to be on the lookout for them. School streets are another option of maybe closing off one of the streets by the school so that kids can cross all the way along that roadway, whether they're getting dropped off by a bus or a parent or actually walking or biking to school. You can see this would have been a really congested crosswalk, but allowing everyone to kind of walk in those different spaces, giving some more space for recreation or kids being able to get their wiggles out in the morning is a really great idea. Demonstration projects. These are try it before you buy it. I know when I'm going to go out and buy clothes, I want to try it on before I take it home. And that's a very small investment compared to a multi-million-dollar roadway project. So investing $10,000, $5,000 to try this curb extension and to have the school buses, the fire trucks, whoever show that they can that they can navigate around those curb cuts or the curb extensions might give the city council more comfort in putting this grant application forward for curb extensions. So demonstration projects are a great tool when we need to convince our stakeholders that it will work on our roadways and will be a tool that people will use and slow down traffic. Whereas quick builds are more like low cost solutions. So, this is a try it before we're going to put a grant application in for full concrete redo, fantastic fabulousness. Quick builds are more like, this is a low traffic neighborhood street. I think if we take $2,000 and put some bollards and some paint and add a crosswalk and a couple signs there, this might support our needs in September, October, November, and April, May, June. And that's okay too. Ideally, we want it safe year round, but sometimes we have to take little steps to get there, and we want some sort of safety improvement because youth are going to this destination daily. Secure bike parking is another, this is an easier engineering conversation to have with school partners. Sometimes there's a lot of bikes there. And so we want to organize them and make sure that they're locked up safely. Sometimes in the school admin office, they'll have bike locks that people can borrow if they forgot theirs, maybe a pump or tools in case there's minor things that need to get fixed. Oftentimes in greater Minnesota, it's not as much of a fear around threat as it is just organizing the bikes so it doesn't look so chaotic. Art is another option. We're getting more and more evidence that, art creates something that's visually interesting and cues drivers to go, what's going on here? And kind of look around and hopefully slow down or see that it's kiddos there. Definitely something that your engineer has to be on board with and sign off for. I would say these work much better on like city-owned streets or low traffic county-owned streets. We're still working to get approvals on state-owned facilities for asphalt art. Safe routes planning is another way to bring in some experts to talk about what is needed for infrastructure or what could be for infrastructure around the school. So we will have safe routes planning assistance grants open next fall, and we will talk more about those at one of our future sessions. Other policies, if you don't have money and you're trying to think, what can we do for the long term that's going to make a change? Policies. So a complete streets policy. So you're not having to advocate for a bike lane or a sidewalk with every new project. The city has complete streets policy says when we're scoping this out, we're going to think about all modes. Maybe it makes sense to have a sidewalk here, or maybe it doesn't because it's not connecting two destinations, and that's okay, but we want those conversations to happen. Some places, maybe it's just a sidewalk policy. When new developments come to town, they have to put in sidewalks, and that is the homeowners or the new developments cost to be able to build in that community and profit off of those new homes. The city requires sidewalks in. That is very common. Also, if you're wanting to get Safe Routes to School state infrastructure funding, you do need some sort of sidewalk policy in that community. So that is a strategy you could be working on that's going to help get that community funding in the future. You could be looking at how do speed fines, the local portion of that, can that go to improve infrastructure in the future? So you're creating your own funds for active transportation, safe routes, infrastructure. We talked a lot about some plans that are out there, whether it's a bike ped or active transportation or Vision Zero or a comp plan or a safe routes to school plan. All of them are going to bring in components of safety, and any of them are better than none of them. And then thinking about winter maintenance too. Is there a snow removal policy? How is it enforced? Are there ways that we can create a shovel program for youth to go out and help seniors and people with disabilities who are unable to manage their snow removal? One quick thing that I'm going to cruise through is another policy approach, thinking about school siting. A lot of what we're trying to do with Safe Routes is to fix infrastructure where a school was put. What about we put a school where there is good infrastructure? And this is a school siting policy. So as schools are thinking about rehabbing, going for a referendum to build a new school consolidation, and they're, building a school between two cities, or that's the conversation, getting in there early to think about short-term costs of building in a farm field are cheap. But long-term, we're going to have to bus 100% of the kids, and our transportation costs keep going up and up and up, and we already can't get bus drivers, and now we're going to add more buses. So bringing in some of those other thoughts that maybe the school admin hasn't thought about. So we do have a school siting meeting in a box that's available. It includes a PowerPoint presentation and some letters and some other resources. So these are some examples of what those slides are from that you can take a peek at. So a lot of great information in there. We can work with you if you have a school or a referendum coming up. We know that that's not always going to happen, but the better thing is to have these conversations before that referendum is getting thought of. What we know is that it's typically at a superintendent or admin level that's thinking about a referendum, and they got some places they're thinking about, so they know how much of a cost it is that they're asking for that referendum before the community even knows that this is under discussion, before you get a chance to talk about school siting. So having school siting be part of a safe routes plan or being something that is talked about well ahead of a new building will help make this decision a lot easier. And now we're wondering, but how do we make this possible? There are some grants available. If you were on early, I know Chris Webb was talking about it. Safe Streets for All has another solicitation open. That's federal funding. It can be for creating plans, and it can be for infrastructure, and it can also be for like demonstration projects too. So there's a few different ways that you could use that federal funding. There's TAP, the Transportation Alternatives Program in Greater Minnesota, opens every October. In the Metro, it opens every 2 years, which is going to be this spring. We have state funds or bonding funds. This varies based on the legislature's appropriation. So next fall, there's $4 million. It's going to be under active transportation infrastructure, but safe routes projects are eligible. And then DNR has some trail grants too that you could consider or think about. Other cities are saying there's just not enough grant funding. There's never going to be enough grant funding. So how can we create our own revenue sources? A sidewalk improvement program. So instead of assessing a business owner or homeowner $8,000 to build that sidewalk, everyone has $5 on their city bill that goes into a pool for sidewalk improvements, and prioritized sidewalks are improved every year. So there's not one big cost. It's kind of spread over everyone to build up that network that we can all utilize. And I'm going to throw it over to Sophie, unless there's any quick questions.
There's a question in the chat if you want to go back one slide, or we can leave that here, doesn't matter. From Luke. I don't know if you can see the chat, Kelly.
Okay, what if the community is on the edge about referendums? For example, folks who are a bit negative towards the new school buildings or other needs like safe routes. Do you have any recommendations? Yeah, I mean, referendums are really expensive to put forth. There's like marketing and there's like campaigns that go along with it. So trying to think about, are there ways that we could, would a lower cost option be a walking school bus? Would a lower cost option be, the city putting in a sidewalk instead of putting in a new sewer system to a school that's built in a farm field that doesn't have it otherwise? So it can be tricky, but having those conversations so that the transportation budget that will occur on an annual basis is brought into the conversation. The MDE school siting guidelines suggest a lot of acreage is needed to meet the needs of recreational facilities, but you can always get variances so that you don't have to meet those guidelines, especially if you're putting a school next to like a big park facility. Hey, now the school doesn't have to maintain that, the city is maintaining it, and there's a cost savings as well as a location that may work better for folks. So you're not going to win every referendum, Luke, but at least bringing up the conversation so that it's had, or that you can have agreements that, okay, they're going to build this new school, but they're also going to put in the money for a sidewalk so that some kids can walk or at least be able to cross back into the community. And your other comment there, Luke, thinking of creative ways to get revenue to make those improvements, whether it is taking fines that are happening and pushing them in there. We've had neighborhoods around schools fundraise to cost share for a flashing stop sign to be used. A PTO group did that. Like, there's a lot of creativity there. So this is where partnerships and people power can be really helpful. Back to you, Soph.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about anything that was covered? I know we went through it quick. Okay, if not, Kelly, can you share your screen again just for the following slides? So I was trying to think about it, and I think we already talked through the Richfield example and evaluation conversation, but for this example, we just wanted to highlight the comprehensive approach that can be taken within communities to really support infrastructure. So yes, they received infrastructure grants and design assistance, but also they had been doing a lot of the other ease of safe routes to school to bolster their programming. They received coordinator grants, boost grants for bike fleets. They participate annually in all the walk to school days. They had district buy-in, which I know can be one of the biggest bottlenecks to get in safe routes to school in districts. And with that, they were able to see these changes, right? So in 4% in 2019 of students were walking or biking home. That changed to 20% in 2025. And then in being caregivers being asked increased from 6% to 34%. So there was this familiarity, but there's also these students that were becoming confident of how to walk and bike safely. There was a cultural shift of, oh, this is how we can get to school as a community and so forth. And then thinking through that infrastructure, it was a citywide lowering of speed limits, and that dropped off their caregiver survey. Which is helpful, but they use the data from their Safe Routes to School program, again, from those other E's to really support some infrastructure changes. So if you're ever interested in that, I will volunteer Tim, their coordinator. If you have any questions, reach out to him. They've done some really great work in Richfield. Next slide. Okay, so the call to action this week. One way to really understand infrastructure around your school is to do a walk audit. So if you haven't heard of it, it can be as casual or as formal as you want it to be. It could be you going by yourself during lunch, just saying, let's see how this walk goes. Or it could be gathering local leaders, key stakeholders, district employees, and saying, this is how the kids walk to school. Let's see how they're experiencing it. We will walk through, you can go to the next slide. And it's just thinking through, yes, the walk audit is helping engineering. It's going to identify those infrastructure improvements we need. There's a desired path. There's not a curb cut. We should have, or it would be ideal to have a crosswalk here, things like that. But walk audits also engage the other E's. So it can engage students and community members to think through that. I know some districts brought in city planners and engineers, which is really smart. So they have that experience of, oh, this is how it feels like to walk. We don't know what we don't know when we're sitting behind our desks. So if you have that experience, that encouragement, it builds that excitement around how can we build a community that really supports that walking and biking. Evaluation gets that on the ground data. Specifically, if you're hoping that walk audit brings some of that information to apply for additional funds, it gives that real life data. And then equity, it lifts up voices of everyone. We'll drop in the chat some of the walk audits. MDH has one, specifically like an equity focused one of who do you can engage with when you're doing this. Can you think about if you have low vision, if you have mobility devices, things like that, to really think through how can it be most accessible for everyone if we are going to do any changes. So with that, your call to action this week. And I hope the temperatures stay warm for all of us, but we're going to encourage you to go for a walk. So pick your path. Do you want to walk to the school? Do you want to walk to the coffee shop? Do you want to walk to a park? Have you heard of an intersection that you're like, oh, this is really hard to get through and you want to experience it yourself? So go for that walk and have some considerations of, was that easy to cross the intersection? Was this route convenient for me to get from A to B? Or did I have to go around two houses? Or did whatever that is? Was it comfortable? Again, we really want to have these experiences be comfortable, safe, and convenient. So did you feel comfortable? There's factors that didn't make it uncomfortable. If you're with a child or an elderly family member, like what maybe their experience would be. And then coming back next week, we're going to ask you, so be ready to share, please, what that experience was like with our group. So that is it for that. I think that's the last slide, Kelly. It is. So we will stay on if you have any follow-ups. We're going to give you a few minutes back. We know this is the Mondayest Tuesday for a while, so thank you all for joining. We'll send out the follow-ups, but if you have any follow-up questions, we will stay on. Thank you so much.